Staff Sergeant Isabelle Izzy Carter stepped through the gates of the military base. The weight of the world condensed into a weathered rifle case slung over her shoulder and a duffel bag at her feet. The sound of boots clacking against concrete echoed as soldiers bustled around, their eyes flicking toward her, then quickly turning away. She was nothing special to them, just another woman walking in with a rifle that looked far too old to be of any use. Colonel James Blackwood was the first to speak. His voice was sharp, tinged with an undercurrent of mockery as he eyed her case, his gaze sliding up to meet hers. "What's this?" Sergeant A relic from the last century. His chuckles were soon joined by a few others in the group. They weren't laughing at a joke, they were laughing at her. The outsider who had clearly missed the memo about modern warfare. Their eyes scanned the rest of her gear, the black boots, the faded camouflage, but mostly the rifle, a tired old M24. The weapon was practically ancient compared to the precision-guided rifles that the younger soldiers now carried. Izzy said nothing, just set the rifle case down with practiced ease. The sound of the clasps clicking softly as she began to unstrap the bag from her shoulder. She didn't need to explain herself. Not to these men who still clung to the idea that technology could replace experience. As she removed her rifle, she ignored the whispers that rose around her like the soft hum of a distant storm. No one seemed to understand that it wasn't the rifle that mattered, it was the soldier who held it. Another soldier, probably no older than 25, shook his head in disbelief. "You really think that thing can keep up with us?" he asked, pointing at her M24 with a smirk that bordered on pity. The others joined in, a few chuckling, a couple rolling their eyes. The jokes were harmless enough to them, the kind of teasing that soldiers dished out when they didn't know what else to say. But it was the kind of thing Izzy had learned to ignore long ago. She checked the magazine and chamber, her fingers working with the quiet precision that had become second nature. Each motion was measured, deliberate. She wasn't concerned with their opinions. They would learn, in time, that it wasn't about gadgets or optics or whatever the latest tech craze was. It was about focus, patience, the ability to read the wind and take the shot when others would hesitate. Blackwood stepped closer, his voice now a low drawl. "You know, the Army's investing in more advanced sniper systems. Your M24 is nothing compared to what these guys are carrying." He gestured to the soldiers around him, who were all sporting the latest in sniper technology. "Maybe it's time you start looking toward the future." Izzy paused for a moment, staring at him with a look that was far too calm for someone who had just been dismissed so openly. The thought of correcting him crossed her mind, but she knew it wouldn't matter. These men weren't ready to hear what she had to say. Instead, she focused on what mattered: her rifle, her scope, her breath. The rest could wait. She pulled a small cloth from her bag and began wiping down the barrel, the metal gleaming under the harsh lights of the base. The noise of the others faded into the background, their voices becoming nothing more than a distant murmur. They could say what they wanted. She had a job to do. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. It wasn't that she didn't care about their mockery. It was that she had learned long ago that the only validation a soldier needed was from themselves. And when the time came, they would see it for themselves. The younger soldiers were still too caught up in their own bravado, their over-reliance on gadgets and gizmos that could fail when it mattered most. Izzy had learned how to make do with less. She had learned the art of patience, of waiting for the perfect moment. No matter how much the world around her screamed to hurry up, as she slung her rifle across her back, the grip firm in her calloused hands, Izzy felt the weight of their judgment slide off her shoulders. They didn't know it yet, but that rifle, the one they mocked, would be the difference between life and death for some of them. And when that time came, she would be ready. The briefing room was suffocating, the air thick with the hum of high-tech equipment and the chatter of soldiers eager to show off their latest toys. Colonel Blackwood stood at the front, his posture rigid as he clicked through slides on the screen. "This," he said, pointing at the latest targeting system, "is what we'll be using today." State-of-the-art. Precision strikes. Automated trajectory adjustments. Real-time data feed, straight from the UAVs above. He paused, letting the words sink in. This is the future. And with it, we'll have the enemy neutralized before they even know we're there. Izzy sat in the back, her hands resting on her duffel bag. She hadn't said a word since entering the room, nor did she plan to. The soldiers around her nodded, their eyes wide with excitement as Blackwood moved to the next slide. They were eager to see the power of their new tools, the ones that would supposedly change the game. Each soldier seemed certain that this was the ultimate solution, the silver bullet they had been waiting for. They couldn't have been more wrong. The younger soldiers were the first to speak up, their voices full of praise. "Look at that," one said, pointing at the system's specs. "This will give us the edge we need." "New question?" Another chimed in. "I've used something like this before in the field, and it works like a charm. You just lock on, and boom. Target eliminated." They all laughed, nodding in agreement, as if there were no room for doubt. The technology spoke for itself, or so they thought. Izzy's fingers drummed quietly on the edge of the table, the sound barely audible over the conversation around her. She hadn't come here to talk about gadgets. She had come to do a job, and she knew the mission wasn't going to be won by a fancy computer system. It would be won by soldiers who knew the land, the wind, the way the enemy moved. But she didn't voice her thoughts. Not yet. Blackwood clicked to the next slide, detailing the location of the mission. "We'll drop here, just north of the river. From there, we'll have a clear view of the target." He pointed at a spot on the map, his finger tapping the terrain like it was a simple equation. "The UAVs will help us keep track of any movement. Any hostiles in the area will be flagged, and we'll take them out before they get close." Izzy raised her hand, the quiet gesture drawing the attention of the room. "Colonel," she began, her voice calm but firm. "The hills just to the south of that location, they give a much better line of sight for the sniper team." She didn't add anything more. She didn't need to. She knew the terrain well enough to know that the spot Blackwood had chosen was compromised. It lacked the elevation to see everything she needed to, but she wasn't about to argue it out in front of everyone. "Sergeant Carter," Blackwood said, his voice dripping with a mixture of amusement and condescension. "We've got a plan here, and we're using the latest tech to make sure it works. I'm sure you're used to relying on old-school methods, but this is different." The younger soldiers snickered softly, the kind of snicker that suggested they didn't think she had anything of value to contribute. She could feel their eyes on her, but she remained silent, her expression unreadable. She wasn't here to win their approval. She was here to execute the mission. She knew better than to argue with him, especially in front of the team. So, she went back to her thoughts, tuning out the others as they continued to praise their shiny new gadgets. But something nagged at her. Something about the targeting system didn't sit right. The UAVs, with their real-time data feeds, promised to provide a perfect picture of the battlefield. But there was something wrong with the way they relied on that data. It was too clean, trop précis, and precision, in her experience, didn't always account for the messy reality of combat. Without a word, she stood up and walked to the front of the room. The room fell silent as she approached the screen. Blackwood looked at her, his expression hardening. "Sergeant," he said, his tone a little colder now. "We're on a tight schedule." "What is it?" Izzy pointed at the targeting system. The same one everyone had been raving about. "It's not calibrated properly," she said, her voice measured. "The system's compensating for wind speed and trajectory, but it's not accounting for the slight variations in atmospheric pressure at that altitude. That's going to throw off the shots." There was a brief silence before Blackwood's laugh broke the tension. It wasn't a kind laugh. "You're telling me," he said, "that this state-of-the-art system is flawed, that it can't do what we've been promised." His tone was mocking now. the dismissiveness evident in every word. Maybe you should have asked for a new rifle with your old-school methods. Izzy met his gaze. Unwavering. She didn't need to explain. She had already done the math in her head, but they weren't listening to her. Not yet. She turned and walked back to her seat, ignoring the eyes that followed her. She wasn't here for validation. She wasn't here to be right. She was here to survive. The briefing ended with more excitement over the tech than ever before. The soldiers filed out of the room, chatting eagerly about their roles and the new systems they'd be using, but as they left, one of the younger soldiers lingered behind. He was the one who had first spoken up about the targeting system. Sergeant Carter, he said, his voice quieter now, more uncertain. You really think there's something wrong with it? Izzy didn't look at him. She knew the look on his face, the hesitation. He wanted reassurance. But she wasn't in the business of providing it. Instead, she simply nodded. Watch the wind, she said, her voice soft but firm. And trust your instincts. The soldier seemed to process her words for a moment before nodding, albeit reluctantly. As he walked out of the room, Izzy gathered her gear and began preparing for the operation. The rest of the team might rely on their high-tech gadgets, but she would rely on what she knew best, her experience, and when the mission went down, she knew it would be her instincts and not the shiny new toys that would carry them through. The operation was supposed to be a clean, textbook execution fast, precise, and efficient. The team moved toward the hostile compound, the hum of advanced drones buzzing overhead, and the glow of their high-tech targeting systems flashing on their screens. But just minutes into the operation, the first glitch hit. The system stuttered, the targeting reticle blinking out of existence, and the UAV feed began to cut in and out. What the hell? One of the soldiers cursed, tapping his screen in frustration. The others scrambled, trying to reconnect to the system, but the malfunction was only growing worse. Colonel Blackwood's voice crackled through their comms, strained and irritated. Keep your focus. The system will stabilize, he ordered, but the confidence he once had was slipping, and the tension was palpable. Izzy, who had been relegated to a secondary role, silently took her position on the north ridge, moving quickly and efficiently through the rough terrain. The team had relied on the tech to guide them, but now they were floundering, disoriented without it. She watched them, calm in the chaos, as they fumbled with the screens, muttering angrily about their failed equipment. Eyes up, guys, Izzy muttered under her breath, lifting her M24 and checking the wind. She had no time for the panic surrounding her. This was where her training would come in. While the team was distracted by their malfunctioning systems, she began to search the area through the scope, scanning for targets. She spotted the first enemy soldier, positioned about 600 yards away, barely visible behind a small cluster of rocks. Her fingers adjusted the scope's windage, and she made a slight correction for the angle of the terrain. The shot was silent, but the enemy soldier crumpled to the ground, his body disappearing into the brush. The team had no idea what was happening. They were still too focused on their screens, trying to get the UAV feed back online. When Izzy neutralized another target further down the ridge, this time, a single shot, and another enemy soldier went down. What the hell? One of the soldiers asked, looking up from his screen as a third enemy dropped. Where's that coming from? Izzy's voice came through the comms, steady and unfazed. North Ridge. I've got a clear line of sight. Blackwood's voice crackled back, tight with frustration. Focus on the mission. Carter, stay with the team. Izzy didn't reply. She didn't need to. The tech was failing them, and the mission was falling apart. It was only a matter of time before the enemy realized they were vulnerable. As the team continued to struggle with their malfunctioning systems, Izzy lined up her next shot. The crosshairs steadied on another figure in the distance, another soldier trying to move into position. One squeeze of the trigger, and the target dropped, The comms were silent for a moment. Then Blackwood's voice came again. Softer this time. Carter. How are you hitting them from so far away? You've got no tech support. Izzy didn't answer immediately. Her hands moved automatically, checking her ammunition, adjusting the scope, scanning for the next target. Winds light, but steady, she said. Her tone steady as she focused on her rifle. I've got a clear shot. The younger soldiers were starting to look up now, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief as they realized that Izzy was picking off enemies one by one. Without the high-tech tools they'd relied on, one by one, they were disappearing from the battlefield, their bodies falling without a sound. The rifle's soft report was the only sound breaking the silence in the chaos of the operation. A voice crackled in her earpiece. This time, from one of the younger soldiers, Sergeant Carter. How are you doing this? There was awe in his voice now. The mocking tone from earlier replaced with genuine curiosity. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she adjusted her position and scanned the next area. Her M24 was as much a part of her as her hands. It wasn't just the rifle, it was the skill, the patience, and the steady focus that came with years of experience. The same things that had been mocked were now proving to be their salvation. Another soldier's voice broke through the comms. This is insane. We can't even get the targeting system to stabilize, but she's picking them off like it's nothing. They were starting to believe. The disbelief was turning into respect, and that was something Izzy hadn't expected to hear. Blackwood's voice came again. And this time, it was less authoritative. Carter, take them out. We'll adjust the plan around you. Izzy exhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing in on the next group of enemy soldiers moving toward the compound. They were trying to flank, unaware of the silent storm above them. She adjusted her scope and held her breath. The next shot was clean. A man in a camouflage jacket fell, his weapon still raised. She moved swiftly, spotting the next two targets in the distance. They were out of range for most snipers, but not for her. She lined up the shot. Her body, a perfect machine of practiced precision, and fired once again. The team watched, stunned, as the bodies hit the ground, one by one. Their disbelief turned to a quiet awe. They were no longer questioning her methods. They were simply thankful she was there. By the time the compound came into view, the enemy forces had been drastically reduced. Izzy had cleared the area of any immediate threats. Her rifle's barrel cooled to the touch. The rest of the team had started to adapt, their focus shifting away from the tech and onto their surroundings. The battlefield was chaotic, but with each passing second, it became clear that the operation was turning in their favor. Izzy wasn't a part of the tech-driven future they'd imagined, but it didn't matter anymore. Her methods had kept them alive when the systems failed. The realization was dawning on them. Izzy's old-school expertise was the one thing that had brought them through. After the operation ended, the team gathered in the debriefing room, their faces marked by exhaustion and disbelief. The mission had been a success, but not because of the cutting-edge tech Blackwood had championed. No, it was because of Izzy, the quiet sniper who had worked alone, picking off enemies with a precision they couldn't comprehend. As the room settled, Blackwood turned to her. His expression was unreadable, but there was a humbling respect in his eyes. "Sergeant Carter," he said, his voice softer than usual. "We need to talk. The team, they need to know who you really are." Izzy glanced at the soldiers, their faces still a mix of awe and confusion. The time had come. She took a breath, steadying herself before speaking. "I'm part of the Silent Marksman program," she said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of years of secrecy. "It's a top-secret U.S. military program, designed to train snipers who operate without technological assistance. No drones, no targeting systems, just the rifle, the terrain, and the soldier. The room was silent for a moment as the truth sank in. The soldiers exchanged glances, their minds struggling to wrap around what they were hearing. This was beyond anything they had ever been trained for. One of the younger soldiers spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've been doing this. All by yourself, no tech. How long?" Izzy's eyes briefly flickered to the floor, the memories of the program flashing in her mind. "Years." She replied simply, "I was trained to blend into the environment, to stay unseen. No one knows who we are, where we are, or what we're doing." She paused, a faint shadow passing over her expression. It's not a life most people understand, or want to. The weight of her words hung in the air as the team absorbed the full scope of her background. Blackwood stood still, his gaze no longer sharp but reflective. "You should have told us," he said, his voice low. "We had no idea." Izzy gave a small shake of her head. "I wasn't here for recognition. I was here to do a job, and I did it." She looked at each of them. Hair, gaze, unwavering. "I don't need the glory. I never did." The team looked at her differently now, not as the outsider with an outdated rifle, but as someone who had sacrificed more than they could imagine. They saw the toll in her eyes, the quiet resolve that came from years of working alone. They saw the price of her dedication, years spent in the shadows. Unseen, unacknowledged. It wasn't just about being good with a rifle, it was about giving up everything else. Blackwood finally spoke, his tone more somber than before. "I've been too quick to dismiss you. Carter, I thought you were just stuck in the past. But now, I see what you're capable of, and I respect it." Izzy didn't respond. She didn't need to. The respect she had earned from them wasn't the reason she did what she did. She had always known that the real cost of her training was never about the enemy. It was about the part of herself she had to bury every time she went out into the field. She had become the shadow in the background, unseen by everyone, even as she saved their lives. As the team filed out of the room, their thoughts were heavy with the new reality they had learned. They would never forget the woman who had kept them alive, not because of the tech she lacked, but because of the skills she had honed in silence. Izzy stood alone in the room, her heart heavy with the weight of all the years she had spent in the dark. She wasn't seeking admiration, but for the first time, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: acknowledgement. The mission was more complex than anything they had faced before. The stakes were higher, the enemy better equipped. But the team was no longer the same. They were united now, their respect for Izzy unwavering. Blackwood, once dismissive of her methods, had fully deferred to her expertise. Together, they integrated the precision of technology with the tried-and-true tactics Izzy had mastered over the years. Izzy led them through each step with a calm, steady hand. Her confidence was no longer just a quiet thing, it was infectious. She guided them through the terrain, blending the old with the new, teaching them how to trust both their tools and their instincts. Every movement was purposeful, every decision deliberate. She knew the importance of each moment. As they advanced, Izzy reflected on her journey. From the silence of the shadows to the front lines of this mission, she had grown in ways she hadn't expected. She had learned the value of both independence and teamwork, how one could strengthen the other. Her eyes flickered over the team, now more cohesive than ever. They were ready, and so was she. When the mission ended in success, there was no need for words. The team's unity spoke volumes. Blackwood met her eyes, his gratitude evident. There was no more need for proving herself. She had already done that, and the team, now transformed, knew exactly who they had become.